Alright, Modern Mystic video. Yeah, it's early in the morning after I left the Tiny Chat early, actually. And I listened to your videos, and, I could wait until later to make the video, but I'm going to make it now because all this stuff's in my head, but I am tired. Yeah, we're not really agreeing on... I'm not going to accept your premises, okay? You can say this is what you say the system is, that... all these claims are the same. I reject that I reject that notion outright, that all digits are the same. There's good digits and there's bad digits. There's good claims on stuff and bad claims on stuff, okay? A mortgage is a lot different than a loan to a jackass who wants the money to go get drunk. These are different digits created, and they should be different, and they should be treated different. And cash is different than banknotes. They're different. I won't accept that premise that they must be all considered as the same thing. Okay, bad investments are the same as good investments. Rational investments are the same as irrational investments. No, they're not, and they can't be treated the same. I think it's idiotic to treat them the same. So that's out. I'm not playing that. Your notion that the Federal Reserve isn't cash is, in my opinion, that's, again, you call it a useless delusion. Right, the money was put in there as cash. That's how the Federal Reserve made the reserve accounts. And now you're going to tell me it's not cash. It was made as cash. The reserve accounts were made by cash. All the cash that's gone into circulation in the last, 70 years has gone through the reserve accounts to become cash. And you're going to tell me it's not cash. I'm sorry. I don't understand. All it is not cash that is now free in the market. Okay? But essentially it's been liberated as digits that have a liability tied to them. Okay, so that's the only catch to it. The money has been liberated. See, unlike digits, cash doesn't change ownership. Cash doesn't change quality. Okay? Cash is always cash. Cash isn't a investment in a, atomic toasters. Okay? 1 minute. And then a digit that is, cash is in the next minute some other silly thing. Cash is always cash. Alright? And so it's idiotic to say this is the same as a digit that can be any kind of silly quality. But I mean, the fact is it was created in the Federal Reserve as cash. It is cash. It's the way cash is created. It's the way cash is released into the economy. It's just silly to say reserve digits are not cash. They are cash. And if it was normal reserves that were in there now, we wouldn't even be having this conversation because it's obviously cash. It was always obviously cash before they put $4 trillion of, let me borrow digits, money in there. Before they put footballs in the reserve account, treasuries in the reserve account. And that's what they've done. They've put commodities, they put things in the reserve account that are not cash. And it's always traditionally only had cash in it. And so it's a fundamental difference, and I just don't see anything useful. You want to call it a delusion? Well, I'm just going to back at you, buddy. I think you're deluded not to see the birth of the Federal Reserve, the birth of the reserve account, the function of the reserve account has always been about cash and how much cash is in the economy. It's always been serious. To tell me that Wall Street doesn't care how much cash the government prints, I think is, again, ludicrous, because they know the implications of that. They know it's going to devalue everything they own. So I think that's just more, I think that's a delusion. To say that in a crisis, if you allow the FDIC insurance, okay, so I'll go back to that argument. Yeah, I made a clear stipulation that the money would be lent to the banks to pay the insurance, for the purpose of the function of insurance. But insurance doesn't mean nobody's liable. Okay, we're just insuring and then we're going to find the liability, and the liable character is going to pay the bill. All right, it's not free money. It's not like a car accident and the insurance company pays the bill. It's a different kind of insurance. It's insurance against the bank saying it's not going to pay your deposit. Okay, but it's not insurance against the bank's liability to pay the deposit. It's the bank's liability. It is not the Federal Reserve's responsibility. They're just providing insurance that the bank is going to give you your money. You're going to get your money. But the liability of the bank still exists, and the bank still has to produce the cash that we give it for FDIC insurance. They're on the hook for it. They're the one who has the collateral. They got the collateral on the loans. If they don't have collateral and they don't have paying loans, then they're bankrupt and they're out of business. But that's the only excuse they're going to have for not paying their bill. And if you have to create interest rate hikes to get the cash back, fine. I've argued that cash should be a hot potato. Cash should never be something people only want it in a desperate circumstance where everything else is falling to pieces. But it should always be something you don't want to hold, because it's more valuable as investment currency. So there should always be incentives for people to buy a bond or to buy a deposit account in a good bank, to move their cash to some other bank. There should be a nice incentive for them to do that because they're going to earn money on their cash. And so I think by just having some incentive to move your money to some other account, you could prevent having $7 trillion loose in the economy, which you can't maintain. If you maintain $7 trillion in the economy, cash dollars, I'm guaranteeing you inflation. You can pretend it won't happen. It's going to be inflation. So you've got to get the money back. You've got to get the cash back, or you have no currency. You have no standard. All right. So you want me to explain again how how the Federal Reserve money is cash and how it means something. And I can't explain. I think when I used the buffer example, I think it was a good example. A good way of explaining why cash is different. And I think the fundamental thing we need to agree on is that all the money, the digits and the cash, are claims on stuff. Not just stuff in the future, but stuff in the past, stuff that does exist that's been mortgaged. So again, we're back to this argument about there's two kinds of loans: collateralized loans and uncollateralized loans. And these have to be put in different digit categories of quality. There's a quality to a loan that I can get because I put a piece of property on the line. It's fundamentally a different loan than when I'm just giving my word or saying I promise not to have a heart attack and die before I pay the loan off. These are huge differences. Having collateral makes a huge difference in terms of the quality of this investment in the person's capacity to earn the fee for the borrowing of the money. And so these are not the same kind of digits. Again, I can't accept this idea that we must have a system that treats all investment the same. No. And treats all money the same. No. All right. But again, I'm just going to keep forcing this argument that the real claim is on stuff. Stuff that's been collateralized or monetized, stuff that you've basically mortgaged. Okay, you've sold the stuff in a sense. You've sold shares in the stuff, you could call it that. And digits are created when you sell shares in the stuff. And then there's digits that are created based on a reliable notion or idea that there's a real potential that in the future enough gain is going to be made, profit stuff that's going to be of value to people who will purchase it, that you have commerce of some kind, or you have skill of some kind, that's going to be of in such demand that you will be able to pay back the money you borrow to actualize your skills. So it's a claim on future stuff, or it's a claim on already existing stuff, and there are different levels or character or quality of those claims. Alright. And the whole theme of cash is to be this device through which you can do the presumption of value, where you can say, look, you own a piece of this, but I can't give you a piece of Google. I can't extract it out of Google right now. Alright, so you have to accept some other thing if you want immediate value. If you want immediate value, I can give you cash, but I can't give you the piece of Google. That kind of thing, the actual piece. So this is the translating medium. You're using cash as a way to translate between these different things. And it just keeps circulating. So you don't need $7 trillion worth of cash to resolve $7 trillion worth of liabilities. It's just like in the Federal Reserve, trillions go into the addition, but only a few dollars necessarily have to switch back and forth. So you can resolve all of the accounting, okay, without any necessity to have the cash as a commodity. So again, I would say that I don't think cash would be a commodity, except in a dire circumstance. And in that dire circumstance, you have emergency provisions to take care of the fact that you have to satisfy people's need for their security. But you can't satisfy their need for security at the risk of creating hyperinflation or some other problem. So you have to do it very carefully. The problem with gold, your comparison of gold and money, well, you're saying both don't matter, but I'm still going to argue the distinctions between them, even though you're saying both don't matter. Obviously, yeah, having gold, you can't eat gold. Gold isn't useful for anything. It's way overpriced as a functional commodity. I mean, its price doesn't reflect its usefulness in the world. So it's all just based on its popularity. Just like cash's value is based on its popularity, so to speak. It's people's sense of security in it. And gold would be just as possible to lose its security. If its price goes too high, it'll become obvious to people that now it's going to be too easy to counterfeit, or all the Chinese will sell all their gold because they've made so much money on it. There's all kinds of liabilities to gold where people could lose confidence in gold. So it's just as vulnerable to a change in public perception as cash is. And I'm just saying the public perception of cash is not going to be diminished if you keep it at 1.2 trillion. The public perception of cash will be diminished if all of a sudden there's 2 trillion, and then there's 4 trillion, and there's 7 trillion. That's going to destroy its credibility. That's my argument of why cash is vitally important. And the reason why the Federal Reserve digits are important is because they are directly connected. I mean, connected with a very big, giant umbilical cord to cash in the economy. And the reason why reserve digits are vitally important to the people on Wall Street is because of that connection. I'm telling you, if you double the amount of currency in circulation, the people on Wall Street are going to be looking at that very hard and be very concerned and be very worried and be very paranoid and be very upset, because it's going to affect the value of reserve digits. Reserve digits are going to change in value based on how much currency you let out of the reserve. How much money goes into circulation is going to change the value of reserve digits also. The two are just tied right to each other. And so I mean, to call that a useless delusion is just not a useful delusion. I just think it's outrageous of you to use that kind of rhetoric when I don't think you have. I shouldn't even need extraordinary evidence. I'm just the basic evidence, the fact that the reserve accounts were created with cash, I don't think you have one piece of evidence to even undo that one statement, let alone any volume of evidence to demonstrate how reserve digits aren't cash in embryonic form, cash in vault form, cash with a cage, cash just caged, okay, but all the doors are ready to open. It's cash just waiting to get loose. You know, and I think that's a fair description of what reserve digits are. So let me just do this, just finish up here. There's no point in re-arguing this resolution of reserve digits in the Fed isn't a resolution in cash. It's a resolution of the the digits into the standard, which is cash, and the reserve digits are a representation, just completely tied to the amount of cash in circulation. Their value is intrinsically and fundamentally dependent on cash being of a limited amount, just like gold or anything else that you would have as a standard. It has to be of finite amount. If you allow the standard to expand, you will destroy the scale. You'll create disproportions in the scale. I mean, it gets complicated to talk about these things in the sense that we know that there's different kinds of inflation, and there's inflation that's profitable and inflation that's very destructive, and it depends on where you are on the economic scale. It depends on what kind of inflation there is. So I would argue that the inflation that we have now is killing poor people, and the inflation we have now is, great for the rich, because what's inflating? The markets. That's where the inflation is. But when that inflation migrates, moves, it's not going to be so pretty. All right. Claim on stuff, claim on stuff, claim on stuff, claim on stuff, claim on stuff. And cash is just a universal fulfiller of claim demand. Again, I like the word buffer. It just gives you a little bit of time to work it out. And that's what the cash provides. It has that function. Okay, yeah, so this maintain par between investment digits and cash. That's your quote, and I'm saying no. I can't accept this idea that there has to be any par between stupid investments and smart investments. Any par between me depositing $5,000 in a bank and expecting 1% interest, and somebody investing, their $1,000 or whatever in stock in a glass highway company, or even one of those silly solar companies. I don't think you really addressed the issue of the gross waste that has been a byproduct of this misuse of solar energy, and that all the countries that have the most solar have the highest electrical bills. So that's been the consequence of this gimmick, is that the electrical infrastructure is under-maintained because you've created a new energy source that isn't even practically useful, in the sense that it doesn't do anything about the demand problem in a realistic way. It cuts a little bit off the peak, but again, it's not the peak that the system exists for. And it doesn't do you any good, because you still have to have something to run the world at night. And so it's not a solution. It's not. Well, I'm just saying it hasn't worked, obviously, for the people. It's costing the people more money. They're not gaining any of this productivity or value out of the transition. So it's good to burn less coal, But it's not good to burn less coal when you're spending more money on energy to melt plastic and silicon to make electrical panels that you're only getting 10% efficiency out of. Anyway, well, I'm sorry. Yeah, I shouldn't even brought that up, but I wasn't too satisfied with the way you just flew over that. All right. And yeah, and again, I don't from my understanding, I mean, you know, having multiple currencies, I didn't know was one of the subjects we were going to take realistically. But I think that's just idiotic. To pay taxes in Google bucks or something, I think would be nonsense. So to have some currency that was somehow acceptable as transaction currency, that I'd have to accept change from the store in Google bits or something, I think would be idiotic. I should have no obligation to, especially if they're going to be allowed to have less than backed currencies. And the argument for the gold standard would be that the federal government would have to have the gold, so that all the FDIC insurance would have to have gold behind it. Not 20 to 1. It would have to be a 1-to-1 relationship. And yeah, we know, I think you can imagine that that would be corrosive to investment, because you're basically going to lock that stuff away like it doesn't even exist. You know, it's gone in terms of its mortgageable potential. You can't mortgage something you have to have. You can't have it mortgaged. It has to be bought outright, a deed, sitting in your house. And once you have your deed sitting in your house, it means that money can't be working for you. You can't rent what you have sitting in the house. You can't, you know what I'm saying? So that's an asset that can't be used to create investment energy. Okay. I think that takes care of that. Yeah, it's been an interesting conversation. I mean, it also gets gets you thinking about different elements that you might not have thought of. It does force you to do some thinking, yeah, which is good. So we've gotten that value out of this. But yeah, I mean, when you keep talking like I'm supposed to change my mind because you said something just so convincing, I'm sorry, you haven't said anything to convince me that reserve digits aren't. They look everything like cash. I mean, they're almost ready to fly out of the vagina as cash. I mean, they're just as close to a goddamn baby as you can goddamn get and still be in a uterus. Yeah. But we know these new digits are just completely fake digits. We know the banks know they're fake digits. We know that the digits never even got loose. I mean, they didn't do even the pink blue thing, right? We just we know who took liability. Was the dealer bank took the liability, and it knows its reserve digits have no value. They've already been spent. They can't be spent a second time. They're not liberatable digits. They're going to stay right where they are until those securities are sold. And that's it. Unless there's a run on the bank. And that's the danger here. At the very time when the federal government needs extra cushion against these kind of liabilities, it's going to have an extra liability. It's again insured essentially $4 trillion worth of cash liability. And in a crisis, this isn't going to help at all. You've created more obligations to pay cash. And so I'm just saying that my argument is it's exactly the wrong tool, and I don't see any reason why I don't even understand why it was done. The whole thing is premised on nonsense, which is we'll create more loans and stimulate the economy somehow by giving people more loans by putting a preposterous amount of money in reserve accounts. Not a little more money. Not like they didn't stop at $1 trillion. If they wanted to encourage loans, why wouldn't they just stop at $1 trillion? Why would they have to put $4 trillion in there? Quite obviously, this wasn't about loans. This was just about bubbling the stock market. And it can only bubble it. There's no other rational way to look at it. You have to go back the same way you went up. And the same effect is going to happen. You bubbled it up, it's gonna weasel, the air is going to escape when you start selling this stuff. So I'm just saying there's no argument here that can possibly be made except that the federal government plans on paying interest to the banks in perpetuity on securities it doesn't plan on ever releasing, but has created a liability for, where in the next recession the banks are going to need the liquidity, so they're going to have to give them the cash. So I'm just saying, you people don't think more extra cash on the market is going to be a problem. I'm saying I think it's going to be a big problem. I think it'd be a huge problem. So anyway, yeah, there is a distinction. So many distinctions. I mean, it's just a different animal. I mean, everything you want a standard to be, currency is. It's durable. It's reliable. It's been protected against counterfeit. It's completely controlled in its amount, in its volume. I mean, it has all these advantages. It's not as susceptible to any of the diseases of any other commodity being used as the standard. You could use wheat as the standard, but I mean, obviously that has to do with the weather and all kinds of other things. But we know that gold markets are completely, they can be manipulated and screwed up so easily that why would you set a standard that isn't within your nation's control? You're going to have a standard for your nation's economy based on a commodity your nation doesn't have control over? That doesn't seem wise to me. So anyway, till next time. Yeah, I mean, over a good conversation. I'm frustrated by the conversation, but yeah, it was worth doing. I mean, I think we played our parts adequately. So good talk. I would say that much. Stimulating, provoking, I guess thoughts and some other things. Anyway, till next time.